Okay. All right, we're live. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining this webinar. It's our first Center for Civic Engagement themed webinar, so we're really excited that you're joining us for it. My name is Mackie Siebens. I'm the Director of Admission. I graduated from Bard in 2012. And I'm joined here by some additional community members from Bard who are involved in lots of different things. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves, and we'll start answering your questions and talk about civic engagement on this campus and beyond. So I'll start here.
I'm Sarah DeVere. I'm the engagement coordinator for undergrads. I work out of the Center for Civic Engagement. And like Mackie, I'm a recent alum. I graduated just last May in film production.
Hi, I'm Mitchell Levinson. I'm a second-year student at Bard. I'm a history major. I also work at the CC as an intern. I do newsletters there, and I also do a project called One-Offs, where we link Bard students to the community in different ways.
My name is Sadia Saba. I'm a first year at Bard. I'm studying global and international studies and hopefully human rights as well. I also work at the Center for Civic Engagement, but I'm a Women in Leadership Fellow. And as part of that fellowship, I created an initiative on campus called Genuine to get the campus community involved with global issues and global progress.
Cool. And one thing that I forgot to say when I introduced myself is that I'm originally from the United Kingdom, grew up in London, and then came to Bard, came to the United States for the first time to come to Bard. And if you just want to talk about where you guys are from too.
Yeah, I'm from New Orleans, Louisiana, and I also came to New York for the first time to go to Bard. I never visited. I only did webinars and connected for admissions online, so I was very much so an avid admissions follower before.
I'm from Dallas, Texas. I was actually born in New York City, but grew up in Dallas and came back here for college.
I'm from Queens, New York, so not far away at all, like 2 hours away from Bard, which is awesome.
Great. Okay, cool. So now that you sort of know us all a little bit, we're going to launch into some of the questions that were submitted beforehand. So the first one is how to find a work-study position on campus. So that's a great question. There are lots of opportunities to work on campus, and maybe I'll switch it over to you guys to talk a little bit about your experiences, maybe friends of yours also that work on campus and in what capacity. So maybe we'll start.
Yeah, this was something that I was especially dealing with in the very beginning of the year because I was eagerly looking for a work-study job. So basically the first thing that I did was go to the career development office and I asked around. They helped me with resources. We have this website called Handshake here that allows students to be interact with different work sites on campus, which was really helpful. That's what I used. And I now work at the Alumni Center, which is awesome. Yeah.
Cool. Anything to add?
Yeah, no, I had a funny experience where, and I think this just goes to how wonderful it is to make connections at Bard. One of my first friends here at Bard, he's a peer counselor, like equivalent to an RA. In college, and he told me about his job at B&G, which is the mailroom where you get big packages, and he introduced me to his employer, and her name is Lisa. She's extremely sweet. You'll all meet her you'll meet her when you get oversized packages, all your Amazon foods, all your Amazon anything, whatever you order, she'll be there to greet you, and she gave me a job on the spot, and it's work study.
Cool. Yeah.
Similarly, it's L&T, Language and Thinking Program, is a really great opportunity to get your foot in the door in a lot of offices. Similar to Mitchell, when I did L&T myself, I had one of my classmates was the daughter of one of the Bard librarians. So she introduced me to her mother, and her mother liked me. And so she hired me pretty much on the spot too. Betsy Colley, shout out to her. But yeah, also checking your email. I similarly worked for the alumni office for 4 years just because I opened an email October of my freshman year. So making sure that you're checking Handshake and reading your emails, and just making sure that if you want something, you're not afraid to go into that office and sit down with your potential new supervisor. As someone who's hiring students this year, I hired a lot of first years who kind of just walked into the Center for Civic Engagement and said, hey, this is one of the reasons I came to BARD. I'd love to work for you. And so that's the kind of initiative that BARD really values.
Yeah. And I know it was a while ago, but my work study job on campus was an emergency driver, which actually might be not classified as a work study job, but it was a job on campus. Some of my friends were in EMS, so working with emergency services and helping students on campus who fell ill or needed help or needed to go to the hospital for whatever reason. So I was on call twice a week and drove students who were maybe at other work study jobs, working maybe in Klein and maybe ended up cutting their finger while cutting carrots or something. I did have to take a student to the emergency room once, but it wasn't terrible. But providing those kinds of services and helping students on campus was something that I wanted to do. So I got my defensive driving certificate and started driving students around who needed help in any way. So lots of opportunities, and the career development office is a good place to go. But also, as Sarah said, you can just really much walk into any office on campus and say, I'm looking to explore get some job experience, and what kind of services do you have that I can be a part of, and how can I help the community by working on campus? So the next question we have is, what specific things can we as college students do in order to achieve more democracy in our current and future workplaces? So not a small question by any means. So we're going to do our best to kind of take it apart and hopefully address sort of some of the specifics that you're thinking about in some of our answers. So yeah, I'll hand it over to you guys first to talk a little bit about it, but whoever wants to jump in on that question first, feel free. It is a big one. You want to start off?
Sure, yeah. So as I mentioned in the previous question, I run a lot of student staffs out of the Center for Civic Engagement, and one of them is called the 100 Days Initiative, which was created during as a response to the 2016 election, and that group of students goes out into the community and tries to connect BARD students with activism, either on campus or locally. And I personally think that that is a really great way that students saw what a lot of them referred to as a flaw in the democracy. And they're looking to strengthen BARD's connection with activism on a more tangible level. You can go on the 100 Days Initiative website and read about student activists and how they got their start when they were a freshman, or what inspired them. You can go on and read about local marches and how the CCE provides transportation to local marches. Like, for example, this Saturday, we're sponsoring a van to the Black Women's March in Tarrytown, which is just down the Hudson River in between BARD and New York City. And then we're also sponsoring a van for some Hungarian students who wanted to still vote in the Hungarian elections this Saturday. So they're going to go down to New York City and vote in the consulate. So I think that how to achieve more democracy in our current workplace, just looking for the cracks in the system, or looking for what you see as perhaps a flaw or an underutilized resource, and raise your voice and figure out a way that you can help achieve that democracy. The van that I was talking about for the Hungarian students, we had a student email the Vice President of Academic Affairs, Jonathan Becker, and then he forwarded that email to me and said, hey, I want these students to vote and have their voices known. Let's get them to the consulate, and that's what we're doing. So definitely having the courage to raise your voice and say, hey, this is something that we need to deal with.
And I think I'll jump in a little bit too. I think something that Sarah mentioned is really important to know about BARD in general and what the college itself believes. So we have, vice presidents and even the president of the college who will delegate these kinds of tasks to people that they, first of all, feel that these kinds of things are very important, but also knows that they'll get done and that they'll be done collaboratively. So if Jonathan Becker hears of a student who really wants to vote but can't do it up here, sure, that's something that's absolutely going to get done. And it speaks a little bit, these are sort of some of the smaller things that really make a big difference. We also do some pretty big things in the world that make a really big difference that I think are certainly to do with this question, running the 8 public inner city high schools that we do, trying to reform secondary school education, and making that more of sort of a democratic system in many ways, leveling the playing field and giving students the opportunity to reach higher education when that might not have been an opportunity afforded to them in the past, but really trying to provide some under-resourced areas with great education is something that we really believe in, and we put our money where our mouth is in that way. So running 8 public inner city high schools is no small project, but it's something that we really believe in. Running the Bard Prison Initiative is something else that we feel is really important. And so providing prisoners with a really great education, giving them a second chance and an opportunity to really engage in some pretty intense educational experiences, we feel is really valuable. So there are, at all levels, from students all the way up to the president, there are some really big initiatives that the college stands for and pushes all the time, and we're constantly innovating. So you'll see there are more programs that develop every year. That's something that's important too, but I'll hand it over to you guys.
I wanted to jump on raising your voice and then taking it actually to the international context, because the BARD network, yes, it is national, but we go internationally with, I think it's 6 network institutes,
5 international
campuses. So I was just at this conference, and coincidentally, you're talking about Budapest.
Mm-hmm.
I was in Budapest, in Hungary. And this is a conference that brought together all different civic engagement leaders and activists all over the International BARD Network. And I'm just thinking about one project in particular, a civic engagement project by a person from European Humanities University, which originally was in Belarus and is now in exile in Lithuania. And this person is he and others are building a grassroots movement in Lithuania, but also in Belarus, to talk about many problems with what most scholars call now is a dictatorship in Belarus, and to empower people that way, and to empower democracy in that way. I mean, it comes through protests, through demonstration, but also through re-engaging the people of Belarus to speak their native language, not just Russian. That's a big issue. People are only speaking Russian as instead of Belarus. You see different initiatives in Kyrgyzstan at our network institution in Bishkek at American
University of
Central Asia. Yeah, ACA.
It's a mouthful.
American University of Central Asia. There are people who are there in AUCA teaching people in their communities to speak the native Kyrgyz language. And these are kind of things for national identity, and I think build up grassroots movements in a very powerful way.
Yeah, adding on to like those larger international scale things that BARD does. There's also lots of ways to get involved on campus through like smaller student-run organizations. When I hear democracy, a lot of the time what comes to my mind is like representation of all different groups. And I think there are a lot of student-run organizations on campus that really address those issues. So there's Colored Women's United. There's the Black Student Union for Black students and creating a safe space for them. There's Million Hoodies for Justice, which I'm a part of, which is creating a space for women, students of color to get involved and create initiatives on campus to address their issues. So there's a lot of things on campus that promote diversity and raising the voices of those who belong to minority groups, which I think is really important and promotes democracy on campus.
Women in politics.
Women in politics as well, yeah.
Yeah. And also, I see that we have a recently submitted question specifically asking if we help students register to vote by mail through absentee ballot. And Sadia, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. So I'm also an intern for Election at BARD, which is a club that is in partnership with the Center for Civic Engagement. And we do a lot of work with voter registration. And that is definitely something that we're planning on doing actually in the next few weeks, helping people with absentee voting, which I'm really excited for.
Yeah, so the district that BARD is a part of, NY19, is having their primary over the summer, when a lot of BARD students aren't here. So actually the first weekend of May, Election at BARD is planning to do an absentee ballot drive where they'll be set up in high foot traffic areas of the campus, I believe the campus center specifically, and helping BARD students fill out the absentee ballots. But this isn't something that's abnormal. Like Sadia said, it's a consistent effort whenever there's an election, especially the big elections, but also the small local elections too.
Because they matter.
Yeah, exactly. We sponsor CCE vans to go to the local polling place because unfortunately we don't have one on campus, but the closest one is not too far away, and it's pretty small, so it's it doesn't take too long out of a student's schedule to go over and vote. And also Election at BARD works really hard with reminding folks to order their absentee ballots on by the due date, as well as showing BARD students an example ballot so that you know when you're going into the voting booth exactly what your ballot is going to look like, because I know that it's really easy to not know about issues on the table. It's really easy to just pay attention to the candidates that are going to be on the ballot. And Election at BARD, their tagline is voter registration, education, and what is the third one?
I don't know.
Okay. That was a test.
But education is important.
Yeah, but education is really important, yeah. So to make sure that BARD students know their deadlines when it comes to applying for absentee ballots, as well as when to register to vote. If you're trying to register in your home state, maybe you were too young to do that before college, or if you're trying to register with your BARD address. As well as absentee ballots, yes, to answer the question.
Something else that we do is on opening day, when freshmen all come to campus to move in and we're there to welcome you, you get a packet and sort of a checklist of things to do that are, some of them are to do with getting your ID and your room key and getting settled. But one of the things on that list is telling us how you're going to vote, if you're registered to vote, if you want to switch to be to sort of be part of the voting system up here, and if you're coming from a different state or what have you. So that's actually one of the first questions you get asked on move-in day. So it's obviously very important to us that you know how to vote as an absentee if you're going to be voting in your home state, but also how to register up here if you want to switch, because you're going to be here for a while. So that's obviously really important to us. It happens on day one, probably in the first 10 minutes of your experience interacting with someone. So that's really important to us. So yeah, I think we'll move on to the next question that was submitted before. What are some of the shadowing opportunities available for students interested in medicine? So this is a great question. So we do have students that come in and that want to go into pre-med. We actually have a student that works in admission right now who is going to go on to medical school, but he's actually a Spanish major here. So I want to introduce that as a way of thinking about med school in sort of this flexible mindset, which is actually something that a lot of medical schools are craving. Having students that come with a variety of different skills, including other majors, is kind of important too. And that's something that we value here as well. So you can absolutely sort of track yourself and be a bio major and work with Frank Scalzo, who's the professor who works with students who want to go into medicine, and you can sort of be coached into going on to grad school, how to prepare for the exams and the applications that you need to get into grad school, that kind of thing. There are a number of hospitals in the area that students can shadow in and work under doctors in during the summer or in breaks. That information, I don't have the specifics, but I certainly know students that have worked. There's actually a student in medical school right now at SUNY Upstate, which is not far, and he shadowed there even before he graduated from BARD. So there are opportunities there. There are also members of the BARD community that are nurses and doctors. And so there are some connections there that Frank, I'm sure, has connected students with in the past. So those are the kinds of things to think about if you want to come here and study biology pretty intensively and then go on to medical school. I don't know if you guys know of any other students that are, if you're close with people who are going into medicine, but
I have a friend who's a chemistry major, and I believe there's opportunities during the summertime to work at labs on campus. If you want more hands-on experience working with that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And that's not just limited to biology and chemistry. I also know a current Bard junior who over the summer helped in the psych lab as well. So there are definitely summer opportunities here as well as down in New York City. I know quite a few who shadow down at Mount Sinai in New York City. So definitely depending on what your interest is, there are opportunities.
And also CitSci. During citizen science, which is does everyone know citizen science?
It's a 3-week program that happens in January for freshmen. If you've heard of language and thinking, which is the August critical thinking written based 3-week sort of orientation for freshmen, this is sort of the bookend to it, working on students in science literacy and thinking about research and moral issues in the world of science and working with researchers.
And there you can, well, after you become an upperclassman, you can get a job as a Cit Science fellow and work in that. Like you work in the lab. It's lab experience. You work in that for 3 weeks.
You're training under professionals who are active in their field, not necessarily Bard professors, though during citizen science there is a mixed staff of both professionals who are working in the field as well as in the classroom. And then also the CCE counterpart to that, during citizen science, I also oversee an outreach team in STEM. And so we work with 6 different local school districts, and my fellows work on lesson planning as well as facilitating STEM lessons and experiments. This past January, we focused on water and watershed health, and specifically our experiments included making mud batteries and making models of aquifers so that students could understand how the watershed that we live in works and stuff like that. So there are definitely opportunities with medicine, as well as if perhaps you get here and you realize that you'd like to change. There are also opportunities to still be involved, but not on as intensive a track. One of my science outreach fellows was pre-med when she first got here, and then decided that art history was her calling. And so she combined the two in a series that she runs at a local library for a STEAM series. So she combines STEM and art, which are her 2 passions. So there are definitely quite a few different tracks to go down in that regard.
And there's also, for those that do want to go, you're sure that medicine is your calling, you can also spend a semester at Rockefeller University doing some very intensive research down there in their laboratories, and that's a whole semester. So you can do that. I think we've, Do you
want to talk about the engineering 3+2?
Yeah, great. That's a great thing to talk about. So we do have an engineering program, or at least track, where we work with Columbia and Dartmouth. It's a 3-2 program. So you do you get a bachelor's from Bard in 3 years, and then you move on having fulfilled the requirements at Bard and then those of Columbia or Dartmouth, depending on which institution you're going to launch yourself into for the engineering program. You would go to Columbia or Dartmouth and do 2 years there to complete your bachelor's in science and engineering. And there are a number of students that have gone into that. Some, I believe, with medical interests. A lot of them have gone in and then gone on to grad school to do things like work in software. I know a couple of alums who did the program were math majors here, went into engineering, and now work out in San Francisco in some pretty cool, nifty startups with all their engineering background. So there are lots of different things that students have done after that. I don't know if you have any more to add to that, but it's a good thing to talk about. And if any of you are coming to Accepted Students Day, there's a panel on it specifically, so you could learn a little bit more about the trajectory for students that are interested in engineering or the sciences generally. You can connect with faculty here too. So great. Let's see what else we've got going on here. What's unique about Bard as compared to other liberal arts colleges? I was sort of joking with everyone here earlier. I don't really know where to start because there's a lot to talk about. But I guess we could sort of talk about maybe the things that we find to be the most unique in terms of our own personal experiences and go from there. When I was a student here, the thing that I wasn't hearing from friends that were in other colleges was certainly the language and thinking program, which is this sort of very intensive 3-week program for freshmen in August. First of all, we all started college 3 weeks before everybody else in this sort of intensive program that was really a lot of fun and very important in terms of setting myself up for success academically over the next 4 years and thinking about college level writing and critical thinking and debate and empathy, actually absorbing other people's perspectives and thinking about them really critically and as they related to your own or not in some cases. So that was sort of a launch pad that I was kind of in awe of, and something that not a lot of other students that I know that came to the States for college in my experience had. And then also the independence that students are given from the get-go. The power that you have as a student to affect change is very real here. And again, something that sort of relates to the earlier conversations we were having about affecting change and creating a democratic ethos here is really important. And we have a lot of power to do that really from L&T, from the start, as soon as you arrive on campus and you tell us where you want to vote and how we can help you do that. So that was something that really impressed me. And I don't think it's that common in other places.
Going off of that, I was just having a conversation with the folks in election at Bard about how, for example, a club/organization like election at Bard is different from other schools, and about how, like, for example, Sadia is a first year and she's already doing so much, whereas perhaps at other schools I've heard that you have to apply to be in clubs, and there's it seems like there's more red tape, whereas Sadia is already, what's the word, is already on not only a first name basis, but on a regular check-in basis with the Dean of Civic Engagement. And so, at other institutions, you might not know the deans going off, but Sadia regularly works with Erin Canan is her name. And also other deans as well. They're super accessible at Bard, which I always really appreciated. That, for example, last year, one of the first year deans would regularly go and eat in the dining hall. And he would check in on his dean Facebook page and say hey, anyone want to come have lunch with me? Ask me any question. If you have an issue, you can just approach me. So I think Bard is definitely unique in that way, that the upper level administration are really accessible, as well as they want to give you those resources to really make a splash your first year, or even if it's not your first year, then to help you access those resources regardless. As well as, I had another thought, but now it's gone. Okay.
We can come back.
Yeah. I'm thinking about my first summer, right after freshman year. And I think this is totally unique, in that, so where to begin? So the State I was working in an internship called the Study of the U.S. Institute on U.S. Foreign Policy. And so the State Department funds Bard to create a program in the summer, a 6-week program to bring professors and professors into Bard, as well as take different international scholars, the participants. So they're participating international scholars from all over the world, from South Sudan to Mongolia to Egypt, who come to Bard for this 6-week program in the summer. And then the professors that we bring in are there to teach them about American foreign policy. The program not only stays at Bard, but we go all over the country. We went to New York City, went up to Albany, went to DC, went to the Pentagon, State Department, all different places. New Orleans. So that's the other civic. That's so yeah. It's getting a little complicated. No. I'll definitely talk about that. But so the one that I did was this foreign policy one, and so there are only 7 different programs that the State Department funds among American institutions, and Bard has 2 out of the 7 2 out of the 7 programs. If you're interested in international relations, history, economics, any kind of social science, but if you're especially interested in making friends with really amazing, extremely smart, and this last year they were up and coming scholars of international relations and also linguistics. This is a program that you should apply to. And I was just a freshman coming out of school. Like I don't know. I've never heard of that happen, but you can do it at Bard. You can do something like that. You can have this outstanding experience where you meet all different kinds of people. You learn so much about the world and about international relations. And then there's the civic engagement program also funded by the State Department, where they Bard brings in on a State Department visa, brings in a number of young civic engagement leaders from the Middle East, and we have people here who are talking about you talk about empathy. There's a lot about civic engagement and empathy, and how to work with people on the ground and grassroots movements, and that for me is like the most concrete, unique thing that stands out in American institutions about Bard.
Yeah. To add on to that, like as a first year, I was very surprised to see how easy it was for me to like put my ideas and thoughts into reality on campus. That's with special thanks to the Center for Civic Engagement. But yeah, I like talk to my friends who don't go here, and they're also very surprised that I've been able to take leadership positions, especially like in my first few months here. And like it's very easy and like helpful to be speaking with the Center for Civic Engagement on your ideas. Like I have a friend named Kathy who works with me on election at Bard, and she had an idea where a problem that she realized was that there was not very many menstruation products to be put into pantries for the community, and she like shot an email to someone at the CCE, and they're like, great, awesome, let's do it. And she did like a whole drive for it and like collected so many menstruation products.
We were able to raise over 500 products in that drive. Very specifically, she during the citizen science program, the Saturday before MLK Day, we call it MLK Saturday of Engagement. We heavily encourage all first years to volunteer in the local community, and the Center for Civic Engagement sets up transportation and food and everything, as well as the facilitation of all that volunteering. And Kathy went to go volunteer at a local food pantry and noticed that even though this food pantry had over 500 families accessing their resources, they only had, I think it was 2 packages for that purpose. And so she approached Aaron and I, and she said, this is a problem that I see in the community. How can we fix it? And not only do we have Bard staff members donate, but we also had various clubs on campus. The National Alliance for Mental Health, NAMI, mental illness, they donated a lot of products, as well as Code Red, which goes around to Bard campus bathrooms and stocks products in women's bathrooms. They donated a lot too. So it wasn't just individuals, it was individuals who came together, saw that this problem was worth allotting some of their club funds to, and helped out this food pantry.
And I think we talked a little bit about the Bard network globally, but I think it's easy enough to talk about students getting involved on our different campuses and bringing people together. But there are some really powerful things to think about in terms of where we are in the world. Right now, Bard has the largest American-Palestinian collaboration in the liberal arts and sciences. We also teach the highest number of Palestinian teachers who work actively in schools over there. So to be in the Palestinian territories on the West Bank and have a partnership with Al-Quds is is not small at all, especially, interestingly enough, to have a president who is Jewish and is very interested in this collaborative approach, putting education first, and really advocating for sort of democracy in that way, and for really putting education first in a lot of ways. So there are some very big ideas that we talk about in terms of how they affect us, which I think we've done well, and it sort of talks to the bigger issues. But to think about things like that, to run the largest prison education program in the United States, which was started by a Bard student when he was a sophomore, and he still runs it off of this campus. So we're a small 1,900 person campus here, but there are about between 6,000 and 7,000 Bardians all over the world in our Bard High School early colleges, our international programs, and in prison. And these all mean a huge amount to us, and we're doing a lot with being a very, very small college. So I think that some of those maybe stats to think about help also put us on the map in terms of the impact that we make in the world in a very, very real way.
And I think just to personalize those stats, the BPI Bard Prison Initiative is open to any student over the age of 21. So you can, you hit 21, you can go and tutor people among Bard professors and among actually professors all over the area, all over the Hudson Valley.
And it's also before you're 21, if you're interested in getting involved, you can help with gathering research for those inmates, and as well as if you are interested in getting involved in prison reform, there's a TLS project that goes into a correctional facility in a local county and works with younger folks as well. So there's definitely a lot of ways to get involved with prison reform. As you already mentioned, Mackie, that that's pretty unique to Bard, as well as analyzing it on an academic level. In the sociology department, Allison McKim teaches a course on prisons, punishment, and policing. So you not only get to explore these ideas and theories on an academic base, but you can also go in to a correctional facility or go into prisons that are aligned with the BPI program and actually enact change yourself.
And to further sort of de-abstractify on these programs and bring them home to on a personal basis, the students from prison that are applying from the AA, that have completed the Bard AA program and are moving into the BA, those applications come through this office. So those students are through and through Bard students. We are intrinsically tied to them in very deliberate ways and in very real ways. So it's not just sort of some other program that we love, but we don't have any access to. Students are tutoring, students are helping with research, and we ourselves are working with these students going into the prison and talking to them about coming to Bard in the same way that we might conduct an info session here.
I also want to de-abstractify one thing, which is, and it's a great point about the classes being used. I think a salient point about civic engagement is that you're taking what you learn in class and bringing it out into your activism. And so in a different, but also in the same line, there are classes on archaeology here where there are active spots around campus and around the Hudson Valley, the local area here, where you can go in and be in an active dig and find. I think they do a lot of research on Native Americans as well as slaves who were in the area around the 1600s, and you can be involved with professors there and make a difference in the archaeology world. Perhaps find a big bone.
Those digs have actually affected what kind of construction we can do on campus. We have protected areas that are specifically kept for the archaeology program. So
and also to further, there's just so much to talk about. Similarly to how you can learn stuff in the classroom and bring it out into the real world, you can also bring the real world into the classroom. I was, like I mentioned earlier, I was a film production major, and most of my projects I worked on were documentary-based projects, even though the department gets a rep for being very experimental. There are other ways to go about making artwork, And some of the projects that I worked on were working with BARD professors. For example, one of the professors, Peter Rosenblum of the Human Rights Department, I interviewed him about his work on coffee farms and how him and his partner would go in before he worked at BARD, would go onto fair trade coffee and tea farms and would, as lawyers, make sure that they were abiding by the law. And so I was able to interview him about his research pre-BARD and how he keeps up on those projects while he's on the faculty, as well as interviewing our archaeologists in residence about how BARD's connection with the archaeology department has affected change at BARD, very physical change, building buildings. If y'all have a chance to come to BARD before the school year is over, or even during the summer, the Fisher Center is a really great example of that, because when the Fisher Center was first coming to fruition, that was a big debate as far as where to build it. And the place where it is right now wasn't the first place that they had in mind, but they moved it specifically because of how BARD interacts with the environment. So there's definitely a lot of ways that, you can bring the classroom out into the real world, but also vice versa, and help educate your classmates by making that a part of your projects, no matter what discipline you major in.
They're very much the same thing here. Okay, great. So, do BARD students have the did we just talk about that? Do BARD students have the opportunity to become indirectly and directly involved with the BARD position? We sort of touched on it.
Into it,
Yeah. So I think, given what we just talked about, the answer is yes. Through research, through supporting students in prison that don't have access to some of the things that, obviously, a lot of the things that we do on this campus, and then I think pretty much those are the main ties. There's quite a lot of connection between, and you can also work in the BPI office if you want to as well, and support students that way. So we did talk. You mentioned art most recently. So how will BARD help me become an honest artist? I sort of love this question because there are so many different ways to approach it. I think first of all, talking about it sounds like being an honest artist is important to you. Honesty might not necessarily come to everybody's mind when you talk about art, but if you're trying to express yourself completely honestly through art, I think that can sometimes be a very difficult thing to do, which is maybe why you're asking it. And I think that there are support systems on campus and faculty here that can really help you think about the best ways to understand yourself. This is a campus of, young people. So figuring out what you want to do and who you are is definitely sort of tied to everything that we've talked about so far. The independence, the activism, being involved, being collaborative, traveling the world if you want to, and having that be part of your BARD experience is important. But if you're talking about the actual work that you're creating original work is something that every student has to do on campus. So senior project is something that every student has to do no matter what field you're in. And that is a piece of completely original work that you spend a year doing. So if it takes you a couple years to sort of figure out who you are and what honesty means to you, you could at least go into the senior project thinking critically about what your project is going to look like in terms of presenting an honest version of yourself. But yeah, I think the curriculum is set up well to get you to think about this. We talked about empathy. We talked about figuring out how to express yourself as it stands next to someone who might be coming from a completely different perspective. And I think that all sets students up to think about who they are in very real and sometimes difficult ways. Sometimes it's challenging. But I think that is kickstarted in the BARD first year program and the programming that happens in your freshman year here. But yeah, I'll switch it over to you guys to talk a little bit about honesty, finding yourself, and maybe how to present that in art.
I have a couple of friends who are studio art majors, and I know a lot of people who are in the Conservatory of Music here. And just from seeing their lives and their academic lives, I've noticed how there's so many talented artists on campus, and the people in your major and the classes that you're in are always constantly challenging you to be like the best artist that you can be. And I think it's really cool to see that there's always inspiration floating around you wherever you are in an art class, especially and in the conservatory. So yeah, that's what I had to say about honesty in terms of arts.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, the way I see my first thoughts about this question is, how can art be unadulterated? How can art be yours and of your creation, and not so much influenced by power dynamics or how one wants to voice their impressions on your art? And I think we see much of that on campus in that it's a small faculty among a lot of different departments on campus that are for art. So, for example, like the music. If you want to be a music major, which is not the same as being in the conservatory, it's a small faculty, and I think everybody knows each other. And in that sense, I'm not a music major. I play violin, and I go into the building where all music majors hang out, and I have a lot of friends there, and they all look at their art as I don't know. They're jamming all the time, and they're like there are concerts all of the time, and they're, so, I think the point that I'm trying to get to is that they have a lot of freedom in what they want to do, and I think especially among if you're musicians out there are a lot of faculty composers who want you to in other colleges want you to have a certain style, and you come out with a school of thought, and your art reflects that school of thought. I think here it's different. Now, I won't say that, like, there are some professors here. There's some professors here in the conservatory or in the music major that want it a certain way. But I'd say on the majority, you can get an authentic sense of your own art with the guidance of people who are composers and doing this every day. And I mean, I can't speak so much to visual arts, maybe you guys, and film too, but from what I hear, there's also a lot of freedom to work in whatever style that you want, as long as it has, or I was going to say meaning, but maybe not. Maybe there's beauty in the purposelessness of art.
Yeah, I would say on that note, don't be afraid to take the most difficult professor in the department. Because chances are, if they have that reputation in an art department, they're going to push you as an artist and try to evoke, an honesty or a truth to your authenticity in the art that you're producing. I think a lot of people in the film department were get very bottled up with their creativity because they're afraid to take that class. I know exactly which professor I'm talking about, and I too didn't take a class with that professor because I was afraid of getting to that raw level. But I think it's definitely good to assess that and assess at what point you're comfortable with that challenge and that stepping out of the comfort zone. And maybe you aren't 100% comfortable, but as long as you're comfortable enough to sign up for that class and comfortable enough to know who your support system is, go for it. Because I think a lot of people come out of those kinds of classes all the stronger as an artist. And it's only going to help you develop more.
And I think all this is also to say that if you come to BARD, you might come to BARD and not really know what you want to do. You might come to BARD and know that you want to be a studio art major or film major, or be very much immersed in the arts from an academic and active perspective. But coming in and being open-minded, and certainly being comfortable with the fact that you don't know everything, and that you have a lot more to learn, and just being open to that is something that I think, again, L&T sort of helps you figure out, and sort of sets you up for an open-mindedness that's very important, particularly when we're talking about art, but also in lots of other things. And also being open to the fact that maybe you know what inspires you the most at this particular time, as maybe a high school senior, or perhaps someone on their gap year, or a transfer student who might be coming in. But sort of thinking about what other things you might end up being influenced by while you're here, and sort of allowing that to happen, and know that it's happening, being aware of it. I guess I'm one example of a student that wanted to go into science, was a biology major. And I think this is a couple years ago, she found sculpture her junior year and decided that she also wanted to become very much a part of the world of the arts at Bard in a very real way. And so became a joint major and placed her scientific research in a sculpture that she created out of cement and light, to how she was doing work on silverfish and doing research. So she spent an entire year constructing this very beautiful, essentially aquarium, and then had her research presented within it. And it was beautiful, and it combined two seemingly very different things. But to her, she found herself as an artist here and wanted to combine that with something that she knew coming into Bard was something that interested her. So being very open, and allowing yourself to be pulled in different directions, and sort of being aware of that, and controlling it a little bit, just so you don't suddenly become completely out of control and don't know where to go. But there are also support systems here to help you do that and figure it out. But being open-minded, I think, especially if you're trying to figure out who you are and how to present that in your art, is really important. So let's see what else. Okay, so does Bard College organize demonstrations? I think we talked a little bit about this at the beginning. The answer is yes. There are certainly a lot of opportunities to travel to demonstrations that are happening in Hudson, in Kingston, in New York City, even in DC. So I'll turn it over to you guys who are most sort of focused on those kinds of things now and work with CC.
Yeah. Definitely. I mentioned before that we frequently sponsor transportation marches. And that's not the only kinds of demonstrations that Bard students interact with. A couple of years ago, some students, like I was mentioning earlier, found the need to raise their voice. So they organized a massive walkout of classes. And I was in class at the time that the walkout was scheduled. And my professor turned to us and she said, "This issue is important. You don't have to walk out, but I am." And she kind of like led the way for us. So there's definitely support between the staff as far as the CCE organizing transportation in the marches, as well as the faculty who know Bard on a very intimate level and know when students are raising their voices and for what reasons. And then in some ways actively participate, which is really great. So between, walkouts and marches, and then also in regards to some more artistic demonstrations. My senior year, I took a class called Framing the Election with Jackie Goss, and it's a cross-listed class between film production and political science. And Yeah. And so the day before the 2016 election, we had she teaches this course every 4 years in line with the presidential election in this country. And every year, the day before the election, the students decide on a group project that they want to enact with the community. So one year they rented out a billboard in between Bard and Hudson, which is a couple towns north of here, and left it blank. It was just a blank white billboard amid like all these other election signs. And then students went out there with blank signs and they were just picketing under this blank billboard as a commentary on propaganda, as well as how elections are how elections interact with the media, and how candidates are how they use print media like billboards and signs and flyers to further their candidacy. So things like that definitely are on the more artistic way of demonstrating, but demonstrating an issue regardless. When I took the class, we created fake ballots, and we were in the campus center, and we would invite Bard students to come and fill out our fake ballots. And then we had this totally arbitrary processing set up where we would it would go between different students in our class. The ballot would move between different students, and then if there was one arbitrary thing wrong, we would announce that this was an inactive ballot and throw it in. We had like a net set up on the ceiling of the campus center with paper mache balloons, and we would throw all the false ballots up there. And then at the end of our demonstration about fake news and voter rights and how some ballots are thrown out for very arbitrary reasons, we very dramatically released the net, and all of the ballots and the paper mache balloons fell to the ground of the campus center and had a very visceral sound that echoed in the campus center. So there are very so you have your traditional ways to demonstrate between marches and walkouts, but definitely at Bard we have our unique way of demonstrating too.
Very thought-provoking.
Yeah.
Wow.
We also have, it's not just this campus that's involved in demonstrations. Right now, over the last couple of weeks, Bard students in our Bard High School Early College program, so the 8 public schools that I was talking about, have been doing walkouts and conducting marches for the March for Our Lives demonstrations. So they're also students that are very active, and they're in high school, but they're part of they're Bardians through and through, and they're also organizing these kinds of things as sort of 16-year-olds doing this and sort of joining that movement, which was obviously kickstarted by the shootings in Florida. So that they've sort of taken that on in a very real way and are joining that cause. So it's on this campus, it's globally, it's in our high school programs. I don't know if you guys have any other things to share.
Were you going to say something?
I was going to talk about the election at Bard, the letters that y'all sent.
Yeah. So something that Election at Bard did after the Parkland shooting was that we set up a table in the campus center, and we encouraged people to write to their representatives. We're a nonpartisan group, so obviously we didn't tell them what representatives to contact, but we did show a list of people, both Democrats and Republicans, who received money from the NRA and or companies such as FedEx and Amazon. And so people wrote letters to them, and we'll be mailing them out. And it was kind of cool because we painted our hands red and then stamped it onto the papers. So it was kind of like blood is on your hands, to make it more cool.
So between all the things that we've mentioned, there are very direct ways of how Bard students demonstrate to their elected officials between the It's on Us, Blood on Your Hands letter demonstration, as well as every Friday or nearly every Friday, one of our students from our 100 Days staff does phone banking in the campus center. So he will have an issue and encourage Bard students to call their representatives about that specific issue. Last week, it was specifically about gun violence that correlated with a teach-in that Election at Bard did about gun reform. And this week, 2 days from now, when it's Friday again, Phone Bank Friday, Zava will be having an issue on the table that's a more localized issue. Amtrak is trying to put fences up along the Hudson River, and the local community is responding to that and trying to get that to be halted, because there are a couple of different issues that would be raised because of the fence installation. For example, interrupting watershed health and interrupting the natural flow of the river, as well as water rescue and safety, as well as just recreation. I've kayaked on the Hudson. I know quite a few Bard students who do too. And so it's a very localized issue. It's not this grand, call your representatives on gun reform and gun violence, but like we mentioned earlier, local politics is important and does matter. So we try to have a balance in that as far as calling writing letters to both national corporations and federal representatives, as well as local politicians, and getting your voice heard regardless.
Yeah, I just want to briefly say one thing. There are a number of vigils that happen throughout the year. I mean, not. I suppose it's not like we want to have vigils because usually vigil is in response to a shooting. Particularly, my first year, there were a number. There was a very consistent string of police shootings of Black and brown members of America, and there were a number of vigils to memorialize the deaths of those people, and I would call that a demonstration because it got the whole Bard community involved. I mean, you'll see there's right next to the campus center there is the chapel, and then actually between the chapel and the campus center there's a courtyard where we all met, and people went up to the podium and told stories about how they feel affected by what's happening in society. And I should also say, just yesterday there was a vigil for or is it tonight? Yeah, memorializing Martin Luther King's assassination.
Yeah. So it's a part of a whole week's worth of programming because today is actually the 50th anniversary of Dr. King's assassination. So on Monday we showed Selma and we had a student discussion afterwards. And today we're having a vigil. As well as following that, a talk on why Black stories matter, and other programming too. But Bard students, as a way to demonstrate, show up in numbers at these specific events, whether it's a vigil or a walkout. Bard students know that there's power in numbers and power in the network too, as Mackie was talking about. Our BSEC early colleges participating as well.
Yeah.
Actually, you just made me think about. It's interesting to think about demonstrations, in that it doesn't seem like we have many demonstrations on campus, but they do happen. It seems like we pull out the demonstrations. Not just the demonstrations. That's a little broad. I'd say the protests. The protests are seemingly happening on all parts of campus, and CCE is sponsoring ways for students to get involved in those protests. But I'd say also there are two things I want to mention, which is one, there's an organization on campus that advocates for workers' rights on campus, employees, people who work in facilities on campus, and they have, I think, every semester they have a certain demonstration. They're supposed to have something this week.
So the student labor dialogue. They're having an event on Thursday about what it means to work for and with a union and how to get involved. And actually, there's a Bard alum who's leading that talk. As well as, yes, there's the student labor dialogue, but there's also a club/organization on campus called Organization for Undocumented Students' Rights, which is could be considered another way to demonstrate that it's not their tagline, but something that's often said is no human being is illegal. So this OUSR specifically works towards raising money for students who are undocumented and need scholarships because of that, as well as other parts of the Bard family as well. So there are definitely ways to get involved through the CC as well as through these other organizations on campus, like Student Labor Dialogue and Organization for Undocumented Students' Rights.
But I remember actually even like last year there was a speaker who came in who was very controversial, and it actually sparked a debate that is still going on actually since the election, but more of a dialogue, I'd say, a dialogue on campus about the presence of controversial speakers and sort of the how do we look at speakers who are they offering substance to the conversations about politics, or are they actually just stirring a pot that is for to build controversy? And I don't believe any one organization organized this protest of the event where the speaker who came in was extremely controversial, and the whole drama to that. There were a number of students. I remember like 30, 40 students protesting outside of the event, and handing out flyers to people who were going into the event.
Yeah. So I think we'll end it there. We've gone through the questions that you all submitted, and we've been here for a little over an hour. So I want to be mindful of your time, and also time of students, and sort of moving on with our day. But I hope that gave you a good sense of the very, very small projects that we work on, and the very big projects that BARD has supported and continues to support in some really huge ways. So thank you for joining us. If you have any other questions, reach out to us at admission@bard.edu. We're happy to answer your questions. Call our office too. You'll find on our admission website, you'll find our number there. So if you have any questions that you want to talk to us about, we're here to help you. We're here to help facilitate any conversations that you want to have. So thank you for coming. Thanks to all of you for joining.
Thank you.
And we'll see you soon. And if you're coming to Accepted Students Day, that's very exciting. If you can't, I know there are a lot of people that are chiming in from very far away places. So thanks for taking the time. And again, reach out specifically if you can't come to campus. We're happy to have conversations with you remotely. So, all right. Thanks everyone, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Bye.